Luna here, and tonight we're here to find out, can you beat Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines with only blood bags? Also known as the Capri Sun run, because that's what Bill exclaimed when I ran this idea by him, for reasons that should be obvious once I explain the rules. We can only gain blood from blood bags. No feeding, no thaumaturgy. No cheats or gameplay mods, except the unofficial plus patch. My first playthroughs broke without it. Downtown became a broken land of floating box trucks. I wish I had footage, but it happened before I started this channel. I'm only half convinced I didn't go mad. The second issue was less creepypasta worthy, but it still broke, so I was reluctant to attempt another unpatched playthrough. In the end, it wasn't even a choice. Without the patch, the game refused to launch at all. Arguably, the bug fix only version of the patch should be used, but if I'm going to use a patch at all, I'd prefer to have the extra content. Before we go any further, I'd like to take a moment to thank our channel members. In the You Broke the Tip Jar tier, we have Ginger Knight, Forgotten God, and Ugu the Monk. In the bigger tip jar tier, we have K Plays Music and Games, Blackwood, and Ying. And finally, in the tip jar tier, we have Ragnarok, Tox, Bwezu, Ace of Kestrels, Jack1165, Narugility, Zachary Smith, and Thomas Quack. Thank you all for your support. First, we pick our clan, which, among other things, determines what disciplines we have access to. Unlike the tabletop, no disciplines are free in Bloodlines, so this will likely be a discipline-light run, but I still gave it some thought. We can eliminate Tremere. Their big draw is Thaumaturgy, which we can't use. Nosferatu are also out. They're walking masquerade violations due to their appearance and rely on Obfuscate to get around unseen. A Nosferatu without Obfuscate run would be fun, but one run at a time. That leaves Brujah, Gangrel, Malkavian, Toreador, and Ventru. Brujah gets Celerity, Potence, Presence, and Bonus Unarmed at the cost of a tendency to Frenzy. Sadly, Potence's melee and unarmed damage isn't free, and we shouldn't be in melee anyway as our healing is limited. Celerity's speed is useful, but it and Presence are draining to use for long periods. A greater risk of Frenzy may also prove catastrophic if we have to go hungry for any length of time. Gangrel get Animalism, Fortitude, and Protean. In tabletop, they can be very efficient, as Fortitude gives Soak, damage absorption passively, and low levels of Protean, like the Claws, are free or cheap. In Bloodlines, however, both cost blood at all levels, and a fortified Warform drains blood faster than a coked-up Mortician. The first dot of Animalism sends Ravens to harass a target. It doesn't violate the Masquerade, so it's a good distraction, but we can't afford to spam it, and higher levels of Animalism are costly. Gangrel also tend to Frenzy, but max out physical attributes while frenzying, which may prove useful. Malkavians get Dementation, Obfuscate, and Auspex. Dementation offers hilarious ways of resolving situations, but it's unpredictable and expensive. The 4th and 5th ranks cost at least a bag's worth of blood. Obfuscate's invisibility is less blood-hungry than you'd think, as its timer stops when we're still, but it'll burn through a lot if we aren't careful. Toreador get Auspex, Celerity, and Presence, and Humanity shifts are doubled. Auspex is beneficial to ranged combat and hacking, and cheap. Ventru get Dominate, Fortitude, and Presence. Their disadvantage doesn't affect this run. They can drink bog-standard blood bags. Maybe our feeding restriction is bag-based. From that perspective, Ventru may have the best roleplay excuse for this run. They lean more on Dominate than Presence in dialogue. In fact, without the plus patch, only Toreador can use Presence in dialogue, and even with it, Brujah and Ventru are limited to level 1 Presence options. That being said, many Dominate and Presence outcomes can be attained with speech skills, but Dominate also has powerful combat effects. Its price, however, is right up there with Dementation. I'm leaning towards Toreador or Ventru. Ventru may be better early on, as Dominate is a great oh shit button against mortals, but I doubt it affects endgame foes so severely, leaving Ventru with only Fortitude during the hardest fights. Toreador, on the other hand, have Auspex and Celerity, which benefit pretty much any combat style. The Plus patch adds histories, and we pick Rehab Counselor, swapping our abilities so we can put 3 starting dots in Firearms, Melee, Security, or Stealth, 2 in Computer, Finance, Investigation, or Scholarship, and 1 in Brawl, Dodge, Intimidation, or Subterfuge. I think this'll suit the early game better, but it's been a long time, and we may have to restart if I build our fledgling wrong. The character menu is confusing, so let's walk through it. Feats are what the game checks when we perform actions, so attributes and abilities mostly only matter insofar as they contribute to feats. There are a couple of exceptions where attributes are checked directly, but they're rare and from what I can remember, not that important. Attributes are expensive to raise. Strength, Dexterity, Perception, Intelligence, and Wits increase 2 feats, but Charisma, Manipulation, Appearance, and Stamina only raise 1 despite being equally costly. If that sounds inconsistent and possibly unbalanced, I agree but can't do jack about it, so we'll try to raise their feats, Persuasion, Seduction, and Haggle, with abilities instead. Most abilities only raise 1 feat but are cheaper than attributes. Some can be raised without XP via books. I aimed for ranged combat, lockpicking, haggle, and persuasion to start off, which meant prioritizing dexterity, charisma, manipulation, perception, firearm security, and scholarship. We had to assign a certain number of dots in each column as determined by our clan and history, which is how we ended up with a dot in subterfuge. Future Luna here. That was a mistake, as many seduction checks require feeding to seal the deal. I think it helped us a bit with Jeanette, and that was about it. Although 1 wasted dot is far from the end of the world, dodge still would have been better, so if you're using this as a guide, do as I say, not as I do. Back to past Luna. Remember how I mentioned reordering our abilities with our history? It was to minimize starting dots and talents and maximize dots and knowledges. We'll likely invest in dodge and intimidation later, as avoiding damage is great and speech skills aren't always interchangeable. Unlike some RPGs, Mass Effect, there aren't intimidation, persuasion, and seduction options for all checks, and even if they're all available, they may have varying difficulties or wildly different outcomes. That being said, I wouldn't say they're perfectly balanced with one another. I recalled persuasion having the most useful options, so I prioritized it, and its ability, scholarship, is in the knowledges column. It'd be less confusing if abilities had the same name as the feats they raised, but scholarship raises more than 1, so neither system would be perfect. On that note, scholarship also raises research, which is needed to read books. We got haggle with manipulation. It may have been better to put 2 dots in it instead of 1 in charisma and 1 in manipulation, since we'll need to buy gear, ammo, and of course blood bags, but early dots of finance are cheap. Hacking and sneaking are nice to have, so we'll improve wits, computer, dexterity, and stealth later. Dexterity raises lockpicking too, but Toreador can't put starting dots in dexterity, so we took 2 dots of security to raise lockpicking for now. That left us with only 1 for firearms, and perception is costly, but it can be temporarily buffed by Auspex. Auspex only costs 1 blood, and its perception and wits bonus buffs range combat, combat defense, hacking, and inspection. I tried to find out if it can raise wits and perception above the cap of 5, and the answer was a resounding maybe. I personally suspect it doesn't, as a blood buff explicitly says it raises the cap for strength, dexterity, and stamina when we use it, while Auspex doesn't, but either way we'll rely on it as little as possible, as blood is precious. Still, it'll be useful to have those bonuses in our back pocket, so we put our discipline dot in Auspex. Now that we're out of that conference hall, let's discuss the tutorial. Unsurprisingly, the first thing it wants us to do is feed on a guy in a nearby alley. In many games, I'd have to pull the run doesn't start until after the tutorial card, but Bloodlines lets us skip the tutorial by blowing off the tutorial guy, Jack, or by asking him for the short version if we're feeling slightly more polite. Sadly, this means we don't get a free lockpick and have to spend most of our starting money buying one at Tripp's pawn shop. Trust me, I tried to get through the tutorial for the free lockpick. I even went so far as to beat up the guy in the alley instead of feeding on him, but that just reset the tutorial, so we're starting off poor in a run where money is likely to be tight. Yay! At least we can swipe a stealth book from one of the apartments in our building, giving us a dot in stealth. Our first task is helping a Camarilla ghoul, Mercurio, fetch chemicals he failed to retrieve from a supplier down on the beach. And by failed to retrieve, I mean they beat the crap out of him and stole his money. We use persuasion to get past the guy out front and could likely talk our way through this, but there's stuff in their squalid hovel that we could put to better use. We have free reign of the yard and easily turn off the breaker on the back wall. We can beat up the person they send out to fix it even with our pitiful stats. Yay for being a vampire. Unfortunately, he only had a tire iron, so we stick to our fists as the next two idiots round the corner. I admit we didn't handle them gracefully. The melee in Bloodlines is janky, I'm out of practice, and our delicate fledgling is not built for close combat. Thankfully, the other thugs have guns. A few new holes don't phase undead much, and they try to shoot from inside the house instead of rushing us, giving us time to pick up and equip a knife the last two thugs dropped, and heal passively until one works up the courage to round the corner. We take him out, and so it continues until we can loot in peace. I considered keeping Mercurio's money, but returning it gives us 1 XP and humanity. Ideally, I'd like to keep humanity above 6 to avoid frenzy. We speak to the Thin Bloods on the beach. We'll complete their quest later as there's a specific way we need to handle it in order to avoid losing our blood bag supplier or humanity while getting max XP. Speaking of bags, we pop into the hospital basement, pick a lock, poke around to find a key to Dr. Malcolm's office and a computer's book, which helps us hack their email, discover and immediately brain bleach what Dr. Malcolm does in his office, and take meds he left on his desk. Giving them to Mercurio gives us 1 XP and maxes out our humanity, at least for now. We'll be working on Thinned Blood sooner than I thought, as we can get the side quest we need to complete in tandem with it right now. We follow a trail of breadcrumbs from a Thin Blood sire, Lily. We don't have to pass speech checks, we just need to show a modicum of common sense when speaking to the diner lady and avoid options that mention drinking blood. She points us to the bail bonds building. We speak to its owner to start a bounty for the hunter and find info on Lily's sire, who she bailed out before he abandoned her. It leads us to Lily's diary, where she mentions a plan to steal from the blood bank because she's terrified of feeding after nearly killing the Thin Blood she turned. From there, we persuade Phil, one of the people at the blood bank, to give us the code to the freezer Lily was locked in after her failed heist. I admit I had to look up where the keypad was. It's behind boxes I didn't realize were movable, but other than that, we had no trouble freeing Lily. Phil, on the other hand, paid dearly for walking into a room with a starving vampire. The rules don't say anything about handing over mortals for other vampires to feed on, but this is why we need to avoid frenzying around anything we could possibly feed on. Sadly, Vandal witnessed the whole thing. Thankfully, it's not a masquerade violation as he's Therese's ghoul and knows about vampires. He's the blood bag vendor for crying out loud, but he's pissed that we let Lily go. She was their blood donor despite being a thin-blooded vampire, and since we freed her, Vandal refuses to sell us blood bags. In my normal playthroughs, it wouldn't be a big deal, but in this run, it's a huge, massive, possibly planet-sized deal. However, there are ways to resolve this. Persuasion requires less than 8 humanity to pull off, seduction always fails, and I'd rather not spend money, so that leaves intimidation or luring in a new victim to replace Lily. We don't have enough intimidation to go that route. If we did, I might have taken it because even though it offers less XP, it comes with a free blue blood bag. But we'll have to take on the replanting a Lily side quest to fetch a new donor instead. It's completable within our rules without the plus patch by persuading someone to visit the blood bank, which loses humanity but grants 2 XP none of the speech checks to get back into Vandal's good graces offer. However, the plus patch has a third option during a bounty for the hunter. We can persuade Gimbal, the lunatic running a human chop shop, to visit the blood bank to work out a business deal, resulting in his capture. Kudos to Vandal for pulling that off with no warning. We lose humanity initially, but get it back after discovering what Gimbal was up to, get 2 XP, and avoid the battle with Gimbal to free Carson. Win-win-win! We spent 6 XP on a dot of research to convince Gimbal, but we're bound to need it for future checks. I'd argue against recovering humanity, as our character didn't know Gimbal was evil when she sent him to the blood bank, and from her perspective, we blundered backside first into doing a good or at least less evil thing, but I won't argue too much. We complete more tasks for the bail bonds guy, but it's all dialogue and fetch quests, so I'll gloss over it. We got a firearms book, so we have another dot in that, though. We still have side quests, but they require us to leave Santa Monica, which we're trapped in until we do enough favors for the prince, aka main quests, so let's get on that. Our next task is getting the... Is she the Prince of Santa Monica, or is there another title for vampires that rule subdomains within large cities but still answer to a prince? Regardless, we need to convince Therese to call off her feud with Bertram Tongue, the only informant Mercurio knows of who can tell us what we're supposed to do with the chemicals we fetched from the beach house. She wants a favor for a favor, get used to that, so we have to exorcise a ghost from a hotel. One of the ghosts is violent, but can only harm us by hurling stuff for the most part. As long as we take things slowly so we have time to heal, which happens naturally because I wasn't sure where to go at several points, we're fine. We even found a book that gives us a dot in dodging. The only spots that could deal serious damage were the boiler room, which we ran through as fast as we could after hitting the breaker, so we only got winged by a couple bolts, the kitchen, which we avoided almost entirely by hiding in the dumbwaiter until the door opened, and the last part of the upper floors. Avoiding the ghost flames was simple enough. The steam from the broken pipes, on the other hand, did a number on us because I forgot to crouch before they broke through the wall. Thankfully, we were only hit directly by one and crawled under the rest. From there, fetching the amulet the ghosts were linked to was simple. We return to Asylum and find Therese's sister, Jeanette, waiting for us. She asks for the amulet, but we refuse. It's a trap that I definitely didn't fall for on my first playthrough due to my weakness for goths. She pouts, but we smooth things over, and she asks us to slash paintings to break up a rival vampire's art gallery charity event instead. If we balk at stealing the charity box, Jeanette will reassure us that it's not actually for charity, removing the humanity loss for taking $250. The Toreador option to freak out at the idea of destroying art and refuse the quest is fitting, but we need all the cash and XP we can get. Maybe we're more of a critic. We talk our way past the guard, netting us 1 XP for getting in peacefully, and then take the charity box and slash the paintings in the chronological order of the story they're telling. This summons a blood guardian with claws that deal aggravated damage, which is hard to soak. Not that we have much of any kind of soak at the moment, and slow to heal, so we want to avoid it whenever possible. Not that that's an option here. The Guardian has a dash attack that closes the distance in the blink of an eye. Normally, I beat it by spamming Celerity or Potence, or at the very least Blood Buff and Blood Heal, which all clans have, but we can't afford that. According to the wiki, there's a way to stealth kill it by slashing the last painting from behind while crouched, which starts the fight hidden provided we have enough sneaking. But I misread what we had to do, couldn't get it to work, and gave up. We tried to beat it in a knife fight and only got halfway on most attempts. One sliced off 3/4 of its health and maybe could have been cinched with Blood Heal, but all forms of healing are less effective against aggravated damage, indicated by our health bar turning yellow, so I don't know if it would have been enough. We tried the revolver we swiped from the thugs at the beach house, but it didn't fire fast enough and had to reload way too often. We retreat from the gallery to consider our options. Since we have noodle arms that never saw a fight or even a gym before our embrace, we can afford a dot of strength and 2 dots of melee. But that's a lot of XP to spend on stats that only improve melee and unarmed combat when we intend to avoid close combat. We have cash. We were able to swipe the charity box without waking the Guardian, plus we were paid for those odd jobs, so we visited Tripp's pawn shop. Unfortunately, he didn't have anything. I know he has weapons later, and I could have sworn there was a way to access them early through dialogue, but it's not coming up. However, the plus patch restores a side quest for Tripp. We infer his hobbies through his name and offer to pick up meds from the clinic. We've already convinced the receptionist we're from IT with our glorious 1 dot in computers. I know it only checks persuasion, that's the joke. So we're free to wander around the restricted area on the 2nd floor as long as the guard doesn't see us picking locks. The sneaking feat isn't checked for hiding from him, it's purely line of sight. which explains some frustrations from my previous playthroughs. Since the werewolf blood the prince wants us to fetch for a side quest is nearby, we may as well grab it while we're here. We have to put a dot into computers for 3 XP to disable the cameras. I think it's required to keep the prince happy when fetching the werewolf blood, but not for Tripp's meds, even though disabling that camera is an option. We have enough lockpicking to get into the prescription room, but not enough to open the safe. We'd need 2 more dots in some combination of dexterity and security, the cheapest option being 1 in each, which costs 10 XP, or we'd have to use a blood buff, which costs 1 bag's worth of blood. In retrospect, we should have spent the XP since we're bound to need more lockpicking, but I like to have XP banked early on so we can improve feats that can't be temporarily raised by disciplines when needed, so we used a blood buff, opened the safe, and stopped for our first sippy break since our embrace. Now that I think about it, our sire must have been generous for us to wake up with half our blood pool filled. The werewolf blood was easier to get, only requiring us to pick another lock without alerting the guard. We take it to our mailbox, leave the building, and re-enter to encourage the postal fairies, and are rewarded with $150. Then we head back to the pawn shop and give Tripp his meds, which grants us 1 XP, early access to the Glock, and a dot in finance. I assume this is meant to represent the discount, but our improved haggling will be applicable to all merchants, not just Tripp. We could have taken more advantage of this free dot by purchasing 2 dots in finance first, as early dots are cheaper than later dots, but I didn't think of it until I was writing this, and frankly, a free dot, even a cheap one, feels like a big reward considering how little we did. Sadly, we didn't get the Glock for free. We also have to raise our ranged combat by 1 to meet its requirements. We can equip weapons we don't meet the requirements of, but it lowers their damage. I found posts claiming it affects chance to hit, but that didn't seem to be an issue with the knife that has a melee combat requirement of 4 we certainly don't meet. Maybe it affects bullet spread? I'm not certain, but we're planning to use guns, so perception seems like a solid investment anyway. It also raises inspection, but inspection only highlights items, which by and large is useless if the player already knows where they are or is willing to pixel hunt or follow a guide. Apparently, some mods add additional items that only appear based on inspection to give it more use, but we aren't using those, so we'll likely stick to the firearms skill if we need to raise ranged combat further. We return to the gallery and give the Guardian another whirl. At first, we backed up and jumped to avoid hits, but it made it hard to aim. It isn't just a skill issue. Moving increases bullet spread substantially, so it was better to stand still and dump bullets into the Guardian as fast as possible. While our Glock did a bit more damage than our revolver per shot, the bigger factor was its firing rate. Now that we've finally ruined the event at the gallery, we return to Asylum. This time we find Therese, and she's furious because, of course, Jeanette sent us to ruin Therese's event. We placate her somewhat with the diary and amulet from the ghosts at the hotel, and she asks us to meet Jeanette at the diner to spoof things over. Yeah, that doesn't sound like a trap. Ignore the safety save. We enter the diner and see a completely cromulent group of thugs hanging out. Apparently the plus patch adds a way to talk them down, but I didn't know that at the time, and even if I had, I'd have fought. You'll see why momentarily. We head to the opposite side of the diner and approach the payphone as instructed. How many of you have seen one of those? I haven't seen a working one since I was little, which made Bill take psychic damage. Of course the thugs start shooting, and we're beat up from the Guardian. Thankfully, even aggravated damage heals passively, or we'd be in serious trouble, but it heals at an even slower rate than normal. We hid behind the counter and picked off the thugs with our revolver. If they'd worked together, we'd have been toast, but they came forward in a fairly orderly queue, all things considered, and the one with a shotgun stayed back the whole time. Now that its owner is full of holes, that shotty is ours. We return to Asylum to find Therese and Jeanette, who appear to share a body. I won't go into the conversation. Suffice to say we have enough persuasion and affinity with each sister to convince them to work together. In the unpatched game, we'd need at least 4 persuasion, 4 affinity with Jeanette and Therese, and their affinities must be equal. Their affinities and changes to their affinities aren't visible to the player, so reconciliation feels like one of those things you'd only pull off with a guide or by sheer accident in the unpatched game. The plus patch keeps the persuasion and minimum affinity requirements, but nixes the affinity equality check, making reconciliation easier to achieve. This gives us 2 more XP than other resolutions, 3 XP in total, and we finally find out where Bertram Tongue is so we can ask him what we're supposed to do with the chemicals from the beach house. Bertram takes us to the warehouse we're supposed to level. There's a 2 XP bonus for getting in and planting the bomb without killing anyone, which seems pointless considering we'll have to fight our way out before the bomb goes off regardless, and after trying for quite some time, I can tell you we're not getting that bonus. I tried raising dexterity and stealth so we had a sneaking feat of 6, out of a max of 10, so a respectable level for this point in the game, and it barely made a difference. The main thing I noticed was that we could offer thugs a free chiropractic session from slightly further away, so maybe, if the stars aligned, they had a snowball's chance in Hiffle of working. I remember takedowns being finicky, but not this bad. Probably because I either had obfuscate or snuck up and fed instead. For takedowns to work, we must have a melee weapon equipped or be unarmed, which is bloody annoying for ranged builds. Then we have to sneak up behind an unaware foe and hit the use key while the crosshair is on the target. Sounds simple, but it isn't. Even with 6 sneaking, the thugs kept turning around before or as the skull icon appeared, and it only ever worked on the handful of thugs that stood still with their backs to us where we had a straight approach from behind. Going into third person and mashing the use key would usually allow us to take them down before the icon appeared, even without raising our sneaking. If we tried to get close enough to wait for the icon to appear, they would almost always see us. Stellar stealth, guys. However, you may have noticed the very specific list of conditions I gave for targets. Most enemies are too close to allies or aren't in a position where we can get behind them unseen, like this guy up a flight of stairs, which is fair enough. But there are a couple that really feel like they should be stealth killable that aren't. Exhibit 1. This thug standing between 2 boxcar crates guarding the path behind the warehouse near the locked room with a ton of ammo. We can get behind the boxcars, but there's a fence that forces us into a narrow space, so we can't come up straight behind the thug. We have to pop around the corner of the boxcar right behind him, and the thug always turned around as or even slightly before we rounded the corner, and we never triggered the takedown from third or first person, no matter how much I masked the key. I think the cursor was getting hung up on the boxcar, and by the time we could get the cursor on the thug, he was already turning around. I found posts claiming the plus patch may be partly to blame as it makes enemies more aware of nearby unobfuscated players, but I can't say for certain. Exhibit 2. The thug that's patrolling in front of the locked ammo room. He has a short patrol loop and walks fast enough that he turns around before our stealthy crab walk catches up. If we could creep closer as he approached, we might have been able to catch him after he turned around, but we couldn't without being spotted. In the end, we only took down 2 thugs, one in the train station restroom and one outside the back door to the warehouse. There was a third one we might have been able to get, but I'd hit fuck it by that point. As for pure stealth, we can get past the first thug if we're quick, move this plywood to get out of the train station, and slip off the platform near a green boxcar to make our way to a locked boxcar to bypass thugs lurking in the rail yard. Slipping past the card players is child's play, and we can get through a door under these stairs without being spotted by the thug on the catwalk if we're quick. The 2 thugs in the lot outside the ammo room can be snuck past, as can the one near the warehouse door, but stealth always fell apart after entering the warehouse, and we never managed to get up the stairs and through the offices to the very specific desk we had to plant the bomb at unseen. I admit this is an occasion, and it likely won't be the last, where picking a clan with obfuscate would have been useful, assuming we could bear the blood cost. I also tried entering from the vent above the offices that's accessed by climbing a ladder near the steam locomotive, but we never got up the ladder unseen, and it didn't give us better options anyway. Sure, we could drop down closer to the kaboom desk, but we still couldn't reach it stealthily. After giving up on the 2 XP stealth bonus, I aimed for leaving with as much ammo as possible instead. We picked up the ammo crate in the train station and parking lot. Past that, it took trial and error to figure out which thugs we had to fight to reach crates in the warehouse and which could be ignored. But we arrived at the Kaboom desk with nearly max ammo for our revolver and shotgun. Unfortunately, there's no ammo here for the Glock, which is why we tried to stick to our other guns. After waiting to heal from the shootout with the thugs, we plant the bomb and have to get out before we're blown to bits. Of course, the vampires running this smuggling operation, the Sabbat, show up. We have to fight one in the warehouse after he rips a door off its hinges, which I enjoyed because it kept shutting in our face during the shootout because for some reason doors automatically close after a few seconds. Anyway, he can be cheesed by running over to the red shipping crate. It didn't always work, but he got hung up on the crate fairly often, allowing us to pick him off with our revolver. The second one didn't have an easy exploit that I could find. We tried using gas cans to light him up, but he won't appear until we try to open the locked door on the far side of the room, at which point he jumps down from the roof, I guess, and lands behind us. We have to go around him to reach the gas cans we passed, and he can tear us apart in the blink of an eye. We led him to them once, and the results were underwhelming, so after that we just used our shoddy and hoped for the best, which took a couple tries and left us in tatters. Thankfully, he was the last one, so we reached the safety of the station with lots of ammo. We could have raided the locked room after fighting the Sabbat, but we'd have had to raise our lockpicking, and there wasn't quite enough ammo in there to be worth it. We should have raised lockpicking to get Tripp's meds earlier, because then we would have saved a blood bag and already had the skill to get in that room, but here we are. Now that we've leveled the warehouse, the Prince, LaCroix, summons us. You know, LaCroix being developed by vampires goes a long way towards explaining their understanding of flavor. Of course, we're immediately distracted once we're downtown. We enter an abandoned hospital where paranormal investigators found far more than they bargained for, or at least that's what we can gather from the host's panic gibbering. We head in to look for the crew and watch as they're all slain by a vampire from a very rare clan, Nagaraja. I admit I don't know much about them beyond what's mentioned in Bloodlines. The main thing is that they have to consume flesh, which causes obvious problems. She says she has artifacts to trade if we convince the host to return to her lair. He's seen too much, and we agree. It'll be a humanity drop, but I'm curious what artifacts she's offering, and it'll give us XP. He's fled the hospital, but we're bound to blunder into him eventually. We pop in on the Tremere Regent next, and he speaks far more candidly about his opinion of the prince than is wise. I guess we look trustworthy. He has a task for us. There's a vampire spreading bloodborne diseases to everyone they feed on. The authorities have already begun investigating the epidemic, and if it isn't nipped in the bud, someone may put 2 and 2 together and start suspecting vampires are involved. To be honest, I feel like the contamination of the local blood supply would be the more pressing concern, considering it'd take a lot for most people to jump to vampires, and the Camarilla have a lot of sway over the authorities anyway, but regardless, the situation needs to be dealt with. The Regent suggests we visit the Anarchs to search for clues, as in his opinion, the Anarchs' disorder naturally promotes unclean habits. Next, we visit the last round, the bar that Jack, the tutorial guy we ignored, told us to visit if we made it out of Santa Monica. He fills us in on the vampire factions in LA. The Camarilla, which, if you want my take on it, is a blend of old money, organized crime, and the ultimate pyramid scheme. The Anarchs, independent vampires who, by and large, follow common sense rules like the Masquerade, hiding from mortals, but resent other Camarilla traditions. And finally, the Sabbat, a group of crazed monsters that flaunt their vampirism, at least in this game. Don't get me wrong, they're mainly antagonists in the tabletop too, but they have a bit more depth with the whole hunt down the antediluvians thing they have going on. Jack tells us to speak to Nines if we want more info on the Anarchs, and we do. But you're stuck with my take on the factions, as I can't play dialogue due to the very loud, very possibly copyrighted music. And no, I can't mute just the music, as Bloodlines only has 1 volume slider. Editing Luna will put footage on so you can read the subtitles. It's the best I can do without going into the game files and replacing the music with stuff from the YouTube library, which I'll probably have to do if I Let's Play Bloodlines. Nines also teaches us self-defense as he's tired of rescuing us, giving us a dot of brawl. Granted, without protein claws or feeding, I see little reason to invest in brawl over melee. If we're going to engage in close combat, I'd at least like to have a weapon. After we're done with Nines, we speak with Damsel and ask her about the Plague Bearer. According to her, the Anarchs are as keen to see this issue sorted as the Camarilla, so she points us to a ghoul who was gathering information, Paul, in the Skyline Apartments. We find the paranormal investigator we ran into at the abandoned hospital while we're poking around the apartments and persuade him that everything he saw was his crew playing a joke, which convinces him to return to the hospital for the Nagaraja to take care of. We find a safe in another apartment that we have to take 2 dots in wits to increase our hacking to open. We're bound to need more hacking, and we'll get 200 or 300 selling what was in the safe. Plus, wits raises our combat defense. We also find Paul, but he's in no condition to tell us anything. A message on his answering machine points us to another resident in the building. She's also on her deathbed, but she's able to direct us to a client of hers from the nearby hotel, Locke. This initially had the makings of a tricky boss fight as Locke charged us with a knife and slashed off nearly half our health, but she switched to a pistol which allowed us to hide behind a nearby couch and poke around to fire back with our shotgun. It took more ammo than I'd like as vampires are resistant to gunfire, and if we weren't so limited on blood, I'd have probably healed so we could use our revolver, which has cheaper ammo instead, but with no healing we needed the extra oomph from our shotty. Sadly, she isn't the only plague bearer, and after wandering around talking to the homeless, we find another one in the sewers. We raised our dexterity by 1 to open the door leading to him. I have no idea if it was necessary, I just wanted to spend as little time wandering around the sewers as possible. There will be more than enough of that later. It was a harder fight as he didn't have a ranged weapon, and his claws were even more lethal than those of the Sabbat in the warehouse. It didn't help that we had to mash through a conversation every time we retried the fight. I could have saved after the battle began, but we started right next to him, and I didn't want to give him free hits while we were waiting for the loading fade in. I also learned that the game does not respect our equipment choices after conversations, forcing us to waste time pulling our shoddy back out. We eventually found a weird balance of backing away enough to stay mostly out of reach, but not so far he'd use a dash attack to close the distance. It took a few tries, but this was enough to win without any blood bags or disciplines, although at the cost of most of our remaining ammo and all but a sliver of health. It's all aggravated damage too, so it'll take a while to heal. Now that we've healed, it's time to go after the last plague bearer. We stumbled into their hideout earlier, and I put 2 and 2 together when the receptionist mentioned enlightenment, which the last 2 plague bearers ranted about, but our fledgling doesn't connect the dots, so we have to return to Damsel so she can connect them for us. With that little detour out of the way, we find ourselves in a maze full of zombies. They have an attack where they eat our brains because of course they do, and I could not for the life of me figure out how to get out of it. Maybe our low unarmed combat has something to do with it, but it was avoidable as long as we were quick and didn't whiff too many hits. Their bishop had even more zombies. The first part of the fight wasn't too bad. We did our best to keep cover between ourselves and the bishop while we dealt with the zombies, and then got into a long shootout with the bishop. We were low on shotgun ammo, and frankly, I didn't want to get close enough to use it effectively, as the bishop also had a shotgun, so we used our semi-automatic instead. It chewed through his health well enough, but we were getting worn down, and I made the mistake of trying to hide so we could regenerate, causing the bishop to switch to melee. I think he was using a knife, not claws, but it still would have done more damage than the shotgun was doing from across the room. Shotguns have a pitiful effective range in Bloodlines on top of our resistance to gunfire. We miraculously dodged the stab. I don't know if we outspaced it or if the combat defense from those 2 dots in wits and a dodge book saved our ass, but either way, it gave us the opening we needed to finish off the bishop. Since we're friendly with the Camarilla and Anarchs, we're rewarded by both factions. The Anarchs give us a little extra XP, while the Tremere Regent, Strauss, gives us a choice: the Blood Star or $250. In most playthroughs, I'd pick the Blood Star, which makes Blood Buff last longer, but we're barely using Blood Buff, and when we do, it's usually for lockpicking where the extra duration doesn't really help, so we take the cash. With that sorted, it's finally time to visit the Prince, who sends us to a ship, the Elizabeth Dane. It was carrying artifacts, the Ankaran sarcophagus being chief among them, and something strange happened aboard. You'd think a mission where we have to sneak by law enforcement would be extremely annoying given how much I bellyached about stealth in the warehouse, but it's actually easy with the right feats. We walk up to the first police officer, bold as brass, and what luck! He assumes we're one of the journalists paying him for information, and not only lets us pass, but clears out the security room so we can access the ship's computer and records. We even persuade him to give us a copy of the police report, completing one of our goals. Getting to the security room undetected is simple thanks to our buddy. We go down the stairs and keep to the right, head down the hall, and open the first door on the left. It only needs 3 lockpicking and could be opened with literally no dots invested in relevant skills with blood buff, but we don't need it because we have 2 dots in security. The records room is locked with a 6 difficulty lock we can't manage without blood buff yet, but we don't have to pick it. Instead, we head up the stairs to the security room and use a password the officer gave us to unlock the records room. Before we head there, however, we turn on the cameras. We can view different cameras by interacting with the second monitor, and one happens to be looking at the sarcophagus, allowing us to inspect it from here instead of making our way past the officers on the deck. After that, all we have to do is pop into the now unlocked records room to pick up the cargo manifest and sneak back to our boat. Since we've handled the available side quests for the time being, we immediately start the prince's next task after giving him what we found on the Elizabeth Dane. The Malkavian Primogen has not been in contact with the prince or the other Primogens for some time, and with all this fuss over the Ankaran sarcophagus, several of the Primogens have become nervous about pretty much everything. So the prince wants us to make sure the Malkavian Primogen, Alistair Grout, is okay. We take a taxi out to his mansion and run into Nines Rodriguez on the way in, but his mannerisms seem off. Not that we know him all that well, but still. Nines doesn't stick around or offer information about Grout, so we have no choice but to find him ourselves. The front door locks behind us, which is worrying considering we appear to have found ourselves in American McGee's Alice. At first we tried to slip by the test subjects, but I found it unreliable with our current level of stealth, so we started taking them out as we went. The female ones have knives they know how to use far better than we do, while the males somehow have protein claws. Takedowns were as flaky as ever. We did our best to make it work and only got stuck when trying to get past a few inmates without waiting to heal from previous encounters. I experimented with blocking and different attack patterns, but at the end of the day, our melee combat is 1, which is far too low to have an easy time of it by this point. Here's a battle where we took 2 dots in melee for 6 XP. It's a significant jump in our average damage per hit, and we aren't blocked as often, but I decided to save the XP and switch to our good old shoddy once we reach confined corridors. Also, if you notice us slashing instead of opening doors or other weirdness, it's because I started playing on my Steam Deck and I was adjusting to my controller layout. Thankfully, I got it set up so we can do everything. Typing in passwords and commands when using computers is a lot slower because I have to use the on-screen keyboard, but that's the only issue so far. We find the skeleton of Alistair Grout inside his puzzle of a mansion, but before we can leave, the mansion is set ablaze by a hunter doing his best Schwarzenegger impression. We avoid the worst of the fire as we fight inmates with the last of our shotgun ammo and escape out a window. Sadly, there's no way to avoid mentioning Nines' presence at the mansion. I guess Prince Fancy Water would be livid if he found out later, but the Anarchs will be angry with us now. The best we can do is say Nines was acting odd, and we aren't certain it was really him, but the prince didn't seem to hear that part. We had a couple reloads when a cop attacked us when we traveled to Santa Monica to sell things at Tripp's thrift shop. I suspect it's because our shoddy's equipped, and for some reason we attack once after fast traveling, which the cop took issue with. It was okay when we traveled with our hands equipped instead, as long as we weren't unlucky enough to hit a passerby. I'm not sure if it was an issue with the controller mapping or what, but at least we figured out a way around it. We did a side quest for the downtown vendor, Fat Larry, but it mostly involved crawling through vents so we'd get 3 bonus XP for reaching the briefcase he wanted stealthily. Then we had our first use of presence in a conversation with a Russian loan shark. We found a ton of blood packs in Alistair Grout's mansion, so I figured it was worth burning 1 blood instead of XP to raise persuasion. Frankly, I don't know why Venus bothered sending us to them, because she offered to make us a silent partner for her nightclub if we dealt with their boss permanently right after that, which wasn't difficult. We'll now get cash from time to time from confession. Next, we went to a museum at the prince's behest to fetch the sarcophagus. Upstairs wasn't bad. The guards were easy to slip by as we dropped to the ground floor. We also found the basement and workspace keys while wandering around lost. Stealth was much harder in the basement, especially before we shut off the cameras. To be honest, getting an opening to rush into that first security room, which involved hiding behind a door after intentionally using it to jam ourselves into a corner, took some luck, and turning off both sets of cameras on one use of Auspex with the deck's on-screen keyboard wasn't fun. The second security room near the laser grid was an absolute pain. The door is painted on, so as far as I can tell, we have to break this window to get into the room. This alerts the guard in the room, but we can avoid being spotted by breaking the glass from off to the side. We slip inside while the guard is freaking out. I have no idea how this worked, but it did, and disable the alarm and laser grid, but we have a problem. The door is painted on, so we have to leave via the window we broke to enter, but the first guard and one of his buddies is staring at the window and neither seems keen on moving. We can't even throw these office chairs as a distraction despite the fact similar chairs in other areas are movable. After many tries, we finally managed to rush out of the side of the window closest to the door leading towards the sarcophagus stealthily. It seemed to come down to speed. We didn't have a desk slowing us down on this side, which may have made the difference. We went back after finding out the sarcophagus was stolen to fetch an artifact for the Nagaraja, which we trade for another artifact that collects blood from slain foes. It technically isn't called a blood bag, but to me it's functionally the same. It's an item we use to gain blood that's limited in use. It's just refilled by combat instead of cash. The prince is far from pleased, but we aren't blamed. Much. He sends us to Hollywood to track down the Nosferatu that told him where the sarcophagus had been taken to see if they stole it. And to find them, we have to help the local Anarch Baron who wants us to track down a tape. But first, this is a new area, and that means we have new ways to faff about. At least after we deal with Samantha, a human who apparently knew us before we were embraced. This is why I think requiring fledglings to immediately cut off family and friends is idiotic. A slow withdrawal would be less likely to cause alarm, and if an immediate cutoff is required, then fledglings should be relocated to avoid this. We initially failed to persuade her that she has the wrong person because we picked the wrong follow-up line, so we loaded back and tried again because without feeding, our only remaining option to avoid a masquerade violation was to introduce Samantha to Mr. Shotgun. Somehow saying the same damn thing in a slightly different way convinced her to drop it, and we moved on to side quests. I have to be careful what I show in some venues. I wouldn't be surprised if YouTube takes issue with the number of times I've said blood, so I'd rather not press my luck. However, I can show the Graveyard Zombie Siege, which was an exquisitely painful experience. We don't have a good enough melee weapon to take down zombies quickly unless we get a lucky strike on their head. I tried bumping up melee by 2 dots again, and our damage was a bit higher, but it took the same number of hits per zombie, so we reverted it to 0 melee again to save the XP for something else. If we'd done side quests in a different order, we could have had a katana, but I didn't know that at the time, so we fell back on our guns. The semi-automatic was the most accurate, although still not nearly as consistent as I'd like. Its high rate of fire also helps, but we still weren't able to protect the gates. If we took so much as a step, bullet spread shot up, making headshots far less likely even if it was in the center of the crosshair. And yet we were expected to run around protecting 2 gates. See the issue? We either had to get very close to our target, or we had to stop and wait for our aim to steady every time we moved, at all. It didn't help that the path up to the front gate had a slope, forcing us to go around. With the way vampires tend to fly or leap, being stopped by this slope is pitiful. We eventually kept the gate standing, but only by raising celerity 1 dot and then using it 3 or 4 times. Maybe we could have gotten by without it on mouse and keyboard, but I doubt it. Bullet spread and travel time between the 2 gates were bigger issues than my precision or lack thereof. We used a couple bags to fuel celerity, making this the most expensive battle on that front. But we have over 2 grand, so we can spare the cash for the XP and the dot in firearms we get from completing the quest. I can also show a fight against a hunter disguised as a dancer. She has that katana I mentioned. We're stuck in a small space, we can't use guns because the vampire who sent us wants this done quietly, and some disciplines like celerity don't work. Blood buff, however, does seem to work, and we use it to increase our strength and stamina. I don't know if the stamina did anything, as it only raises bashing soak and she was using a blade, but the strength certainly helped. It wasn't enough to keep this from becoming another blood-hungry fight, though. We had to use not only a regular blood bag, but one of the bags of Elder Vitae we got in Grout's mansion. At least we got the full benefit, as we were nearly out of blood and health, but I'd like to hang on to those for later. We got back on track and found the tape the Baron wanted. It shows a woman getting torn apart by monsters. The Baron recognizes the exterior of the house the film started at, and of course we're sent to investigate. The house doesn't take long to get through. Unlike most supernatural foes, the monsters launching themselves at us don't have much soak, even against bashing damage. So this is a rare case where our fists do more damage than melee weapons. We have a dot in Brawl, and our fists have an unarmed combat requirement of 1, so they're getting a tiny bit of bonus damage, whereas our weapons have a melee combat requirement of at least 4, and we've put no dots in melee or strength, so they're taking a penalty. However, most enemies we've been fighting lately have had bashing soak, so our blade's lethal damage and extra reach has given them an edge, but we can easily tear these things apart with our bare hands. Their claws deal aggravated damage, so we have to keep them stun-locked, and if there are a lot, they can become a problem, but we only found 1 or 2 at a time for the most part. Their master, a Zamisi fleshcrafter, was surprisingly easy to deal with. He never attacked directly, and while we spent a lot of time beating his summoned creatures to a pulp, we weren't in much danger as long as we kept their numbers low. This left us with little time to shoot the Zamisi, with our shotgun rifle or magnum, since they have the best lethality of our ranged arsenal, indicating their effectiveness against vampires. So the battle took ages, but I never felt pressured to use disciplines. Sadly, we still had to navigate the labyrinthine sewers to reach the Nosferatu. However, the Plus patch lets us skip the worst of it by hacking a computer to open a shortcut. It required 7 hacking and we had to use Auspex, but it was well worth it to skip the maze. We still had to slip by scarier flesh-crafted monsters, but thankfully a sneaking feat of 6, 4 dex plus 2 stealth, has broken stealth. In dark environments, we can practically reach out and touch foes without alerting them. Bloodlines is also very generous about what it considers dark. The light meter only goes up significantly when we're next to bright light sources. I don't know what amount of sneaking was needed, but it felt less like a progression curve and more like we flipped a switch that made stealth not only possible, but easy. I don't know what was going on at the warehouse. We tested 6 sneaking there by dumping all our XP at the time into stealth and dexterity, and it didn't help, so we loaded back and spent the XP elsewhere. In fact, it was so bad I wrote off investing in sneaking entirely, and we only got more because we needed dexterity for lockpicking. I picked up a second cheap dot in stealth after I realized it was suddenly working. I think it was while we were at the museum. If anyone has insight on why the warehouse was so hard to sneak through and yet we're able to do a jig in front of Nazca's little sister in the sewers, both at 6 sneaking, I'd appreciate it. Anyway, we make it to the Nosferatu Warrens and pick up a couple side quests I won't bother covering since they only require stealth and hacking. But if you're wondering where the XP and money came from between here and the next main quest, it's from those. We lost humanity from one, but considering the person who bought it did so after being caught doing things to a llama the llama couldn't have possibly consented to, I don't feel bad about it and frankly question the humanity drop. Not that it matters, as we still have 8 humanity and we haven't even danced yet. One side quest I will cover is Bertram's missing data. It's simple. We have to find a data disk somewhere in all this mess. It took a while, but it was worth it because Bertram gave us our 5th dot of computers. The Nosferatu leader, Gary, had choice words for us. These Nosferatu are anarchs, we're representing the Camarilla, and on top of that, we're Toreador. You know, the clan that stereotypically values beauty? I prefer more varied interpretations of artistry when I play a Toreador, but frankly, it's nice when RPGs have lines like this at all. I do wish it varied based on our appearance, though. Despite being a Toreador, we only have 1 dot in it, which is the minimum for attributes, so statistically, we're ugly. Back to the plot, Gary refuses to tell us where the sarcophagus is until we find an informant who recently disappeared in Chinatown. Which brings us to the Kindred of the East. Take it away, Hunter the Parenting.
My dad tells me literally nothing ever, and yet even he told me up front that the Quajin are a LARP group based out of LA who hijack concepts from like 10 different Asian cultures and mash them up without actually knowing anything about them.
Oh yeah?
This is the point where the game usually starts severely bugging out in my experience, and as if on cue, a short cutscene where we witness a kidnapping after leaving the Quajin temple hangs. This persisted through several reloads, and this cutscene isn't skippable, so I was very worried the run would end here watching 3 thugs spaz out in an alley. But a post suggested loading a save from before entering the temple and trying again, and thankfully that worked. For some reason, we can't just go after the kidnappers. We have to visit the owner of the Red Dragon restaurant so he can tell us his daughter was kidnapped and where they took her. The Lotus Blossom, which happens to be the first door in the alley the thugs ran down. We have a lock-picking feat of 8 when wearing light clothes, 4 dex and 4 security. So we can use Blood Buff to get past a locked door near the entrance, head up the stairs, and reach the kidnapped woman. From there, we led her down the stairs, through a bathhouse where she got the bright idea to run in front of the only person in the place, but thankfully this didn't result in us being spotted, through a locker room and out a back door. I'm not sure if she had no effect on stealth or if we just got lucky that the guy in the bath didn't raise the alarm, but either way, I'll take it. I would prefer the former, though. Yeah, it looks goofy if an NPC can waltz right past guards during stealth, but I'll always pick that over our cover being blown by brain-dead followers, especially when those followers are not optional. We took her back to the Red Dragon, and the owner told us to visit Zhao's imports. Zhao didn't know where our informant was, but he told us to find yet another person who might. I'm seeing a pattern here, and we had to fight our way out. The next lead was the owner of a nightclub, and we had to persuade an employee to let us see him. He panicked when we mentioned the informant, and then a third party that knew an awful lot about vampires joined our conversation via video call. He told us to eliminate the owner, who now knew too much, and after we put him down, the mystery caller told us to meet him at an office building. It's an obvious trap, but we don't have a choice. We're locked into a gauntlet of GLaDOS-esque experiments when we arrive. First, we have to dodge a bunch of lasers, which did not go well, but we made it to the far side of the room with 1 HP and a dream. The next room had spinning blades that were easier to dodge, but I couldn't figure out what we were supposed to do. The door was closed, and from what our host said, I thought we had to take damage before he'd let us proceed, but it turned out we had to shoot boxes in the back of the room to shut the blades off. Next up is a guy with a cross, but without true faith it does nothing, so we smack him around until commandos are sent in. We took quite a few hits climbing up to the level they were on. Good old Source Engine ladders. So we had to use Blood Heal and a blood bag to punch through the first two, securing a corner for us to hide in while we picked off the rest. The next room had flamethrowers, and my first instinct was to shoot the tank on the nearest one to disable it, shattering the glass of the cell so we could escape. That worked better than I thought it would. We had to get past our jailer and 2 commandos, leading to a janky shootout where we shot the jailer and backed around a corner while crouched. He ran up for a moment and then went back around the corner, rinse and repeat. We finally found the informant and he helped us fight our way out and wipe the data this group had gathered with their experiments. We also found emails that strongly implied the Kuei Jin were involved with this group, but we aren't going to let them know that we know. Gary called as we left the building and let us know the sarcophagus was stolen by the Giovanni, an incestuous clan known for necromancy. However, we have side quests around Chinatown to do first. A shopkeeper, Mr. Ox, who I strongly suspect is not mortal, wanted eyes from a thief, and oddly enough, we already had them because if a game lets me loot something, I loot it. He gives us cash and an amulet that raises security. It won't help while wearing light clothing. Locks mostly jump from 8 difficulty to 10, and blood buff already gets us to 10 in light clothing, but it'll allow us to blood buff to 10 even with the dex penalty from heavier clothing, so we can stop changing outfits when picking difficult locks. We had a hiccup with that earlier and had to load back to avoid wasting a blood buff. I know we have bags and that artifact and 1 buff won't make a difference, but my mind goblins made me load back anyway. Next we had to fight a were-shark who apparently had a sense of humor as it set up a meeting at a fish market. Finding the fish market took longer than the fight. We might be Malkavian because we got into an argument with the map in the sewers after I failed to spot the market in the spot it indicated. I swear that sign wasn't there before, but Bill said I'm blind. Also, why are there no maps up on street level? The were-shark would have been a lot more dangerous if it had used its claws instead of throwing things at us. It shouldn't have been that easy to take down a werebeast regardless, though. Remember this when we run into a werewolf later. We had 50 XP banked, so we purchased 1 dot of strength and stamina. They were cheap, and we've been in close combat more than I thought we'd be. We got a 2nd dot in Brawl to go with it, allowing us to read a skill book we've been carrying since I think the Plague Bearer to get a 3rd dot in Brawl. We also grabbed 2 dots of melee in case we need lethal damage from our blades. Again, early dots are cheap and we have a skill book from the Skyline Apartments that'll get us a free 3rd dot. Our defense could use some work too, so we got a dot of dodge and wits, bringing our combat defense to 8. 9 with the Wekapog Thistle we found in Grout's mansion. It also maxed out hacking so we can get into any system ever built, provided we have time for me to type with the on-screen keyboard. The Giovanni mansion isn't difficult to infiltrate, which I'm going to savor as it's likely to be the last easy area before we hit the boss gauntlet. We have to take a dot of charisma, but we not only talk our way in, we play politics for funsies and cash. We pick up a book for the Nagaraja along the way, as well as an artifact we aren't smart enough to use. I don't know if it's worth the XP to get 2 more research. We could use a couple more books for dodge, melee, and firearms if we got research 9, but it might be less expensive to raise the feats those contribute to directly. We don't have to fight anything worse than zombies until we run into the Double Dragon rejects guarding the sarcophagus. They claim LaCroix has been allied with the Kuei Jin this whole time, something even the rest of the Camarilla wouldn't stand for. We have to take them down regardless of how we plan to deal with LaCroix, which takes a couple tries. Once I got used to how they moved, we led them on a merry chase as we pumped them full of lead, although the Claw Brother was troublesome as his stray hits dealt aggravated damage. We take the sarcophagus to the prince and keep our knowledge of his dealings with the Kuei Jin to ourselves for now. Of course, there's yet another problem. The sarcophagus won't open, and even the scholar, Beckett, is stumped. However, Beckett knows of a person who may be able to help. the professor who unearthed the sarcophagus, but he's been abducted by the hunters that have been popping up, so we have to free him from their monastery. We sneak past the guards outside and stealthily stab most of the ones on the ground floor, but we have trouble getting past the ones in the caves. I couldn't find a good spot to start the fight from. Our options were crates that were way too close to the hunters, water, or a tunnel with no cover. And on top of that, we were beat up from the previous fights. We ended up having to wait and recover so we could punch through without disciplines, and we had to wait around to heal again before entering the next cavern where the hunter we met at Grout's mansion, Bach, was waiting for us. Also, flashing lights warning until Bach is dealt with. I quickly learned he could put us down in 2 or 3 shots, but it was also easy to find cover and heal as much as we wanted since he wasn't keen on moving to flank us. We could only get a couple melee hits on him before he pulled across, which works for him since he has true faith, and he basically used it as a flashbang so he could relocate, which drew the fight out a lot. You all get to skip to the last couple rounds through movie magic. We free the professor, who reveals the sarcophagus has a matching key that was stolen from the Dane before we ever laid eyes on the sarcophagus, so we'll have to find that. When we return to the LaCroix building to give the prince the news, we find blood and corpses in the lobby. The prince is fine, but this blatant Sabbat attack has shifted his priorities, and he orders us to head to their lair and wipe them out. This part gave me fits during my Warformed Gangrel playthrough, but frankly I wouldn't be surprised if I built my character badly and or missed side quests and by extension XP. I'd like to think I prepared better this time round. We dealt with the Sabbat in the upper part of their lair with the sniper rifle we nicked from Bach, but it was our shoddy 44 and Desert Eagle that carried the day in the tunnels. We're getting better in close combat, but some Sabbat can still outmatch us up close, especially if their allies are shooting us. They don't stand up well to our guns though, and I finally found out we can move while crouching without bullet spreads skyrocketing. I feel like crab walking would make that worse, but okay, at least we can get a tiny bit of distance as we frantically blast the ones with claws, or poke around a corner without having to awkwardly stand still for a moment steadying our aim afterward. I cannot overstate the amount of ammo we used. We were running low on our shoddy despite scavenging from the Sabbat. Our Eagle had 5 bullets left, and we'd used all of our 305 rounds, which I realized both our rifles were using, so we'll sell the weaker one and bring something else along when we get a chance. We also used about half of our 44 rounds and a few of the 9mm from the Glock. The Zamisi was once again a disappointment. He changed things up and attacked us in a flesh-crafted war form that could deal lots of aggravated damage if he put his mind to it, but he made the mistake of using a discipline that frenzied us, and our delicate little Toreador, who I remind you only has 2 strength and stamina, but also luckily 3 brawl, proceeded to beat the living snot out of him in a blind rage. It would have been narratively beautiful if we took him out before the frenzy ended, but we didn't quite manage it and finished him off with our Desert Eagle. We also found a really nice sword nearby that's hopefully only slightly evil because we'll be using it. We're approached by the Kuei Jin outside, and she reveals LaCroix asked her to shapeshift into Nines, slay Grout, and make sure we saw her at Grout's mansion to cast suspicion onto Nines. She also has the key to the sarcophagus. LaCroix denies the plot to implicate Nines in Grout's death, of course, and counters with a plan to call off the blood hunt on Nines and forge an alliance with the Anarchs against the Kuei Jin. We go along with it, for now at least, and head to the last round in the hopes they'll tell us where Nines is hiding. Since we've been on as good a terms with the Anarchs as we can be while the game forces us to play nice with LaCroix, they tell us as soon as we let them know about the Kuei Jin shape-shifting into Nines and that the blood hunt has been called off. Nines is in a nearby state park, and we head out to ask him about an alliance. We don't get much time to talk before the forest is set alight, though. While the fire is far enough to not be immediately dangerous, it's riled up werewolves. And werewolves are extremely dangerous, and most hate vampires with a passion, especially if they think those vampires have set their forest ablaze. Nines is snatched by a werewolf before the tram arrives, and we have to deal with its packmate. There are 3 ways to survive this. Last 5 minutes and run to the tram when it arrives, slay the werewolf, which I think is only possible with the plus patch, guns do nothing, so we have melee and celerity, and we only do 10 damage per hit. It takes ages and a ton of bags, not to mention all the XP we jumped into strength and celerity just for this fight, but we can defeat it. However, we're loading back and taking option 3, crushing the werewolf with an observatory. It took a moment to find the switch to power the observatory, and we had to burn blood on celerity to stay ahead of the werewolf nipping at our heels, but it cost us far less than going toe-to-toe with the werewolf. Come on, Pupper! I have a treat! Treats! Smiling Jack meets us at the edge of the park and gets us home before sunrise, but when we wake up, there's bad news.
LaCroix put out the word. He says you're in league with the Kuei Jin, Ming Zhao's puppet, that you're the one who set up nines for her. See, he's figured it all out, and now your death is a big bullet point in his new Unity campaign. There's a blood hunt on you.
The sewers and alleys that would normally let us easily get to the taxi are blocked off. We can slip into the parking garage through the gap near Gallery Noir to avoid a few of the vampires hunting us, but for the most part we have to rely on our sneaking to get through unseen. To be clear, we could fight our way to the taxi, but I'd like to save the ammo for the boss rush that's staring us in the face. Once we get in the taxi, we're presented with choices that determine our ending. While it does fall into the trope of choosing between endings A, B, or C right at the end, the available options are based on who we've been on civil terms with, so that's something at least. We're siding with the Anarchs. They've been the most helpful with the fewest strings attached. We find out Nines skinned his werewolf as well, but got more beat up than we did and needs time to heal. The other Anarchs are guarding Nines, so that leaves us to go after the Kuei Jin and the Prince. The Kuei Jin are up first, and surprisingly we don't have much trouble. Our investment in melee combat and combat defense are paying off. I knew combat defense was checked against melee, unarmed, or ranged combat depending on the weapon used, but I didn't grasp how it impacts close combat in particular. We're dodging and blocking hits way more often, and thanks to our higher melee combat, enemies are dodging and blocking far less often. We still get hit from time to time, especially when facing multiple foes, but we're taking on groups of 3 or more with little discipline use, although we had to wait around to heal passively a lot between fights. The only time we had trouble before finding the Kuei Jin was when we were fetching jade statues to open a puzzle door. The crossbowmen near them were far more competent than the ones outside, and we had to leap over a trigger in the hallway that would unleash an insta-kill blade trap. We got caught on a torch near them and landed right on the trigger once, which was fun. Ming Zhao was tricky. She dealt heavy damage, especially up close, but we put a dot into celerity, bringing it to 3, and we've saved bags precisely so we can keep it up during these boss fights, allowing us to stay out of reach for most of the battle. The bags we drink to fuel celerity also keep us in the fight without too many blood heals, and we do decent damage with our shoddy 44 and Desert Eagle. Things got more hectic after a severed tentacle grew into a full-size clone, but we played keep away long enough to put down the real Ming Zhao on our first try. This went so much better than it did for my gangrel that I checked to make sure the plus patch doesn't make it easier. And all I found was that both versions of the unofficial patch make it so we don't have to finish off the clones after Ming Zhao is down, which didn't make much difference. I feel like I need to do an unarmed run to redeem my gangrel. There are floating stone limbs stuck in doors around the hotel Nines is hiding at when we let him know about the Kuei Jin. It reminds me of the floating box truck apocalypse, so we need to finish this ASAP. We stock up on as much ammo as we can for our Desert Eagle, which was completely spent against Ming Zhao, but only have enough cash to get about half of what we could potentially carry, even after selling everything we could stand apart with that was worth anything. On to the assault on LaCroix. We convince Chunk to leave out of the goodness of our hearts and take down his more athletic co-workers. The Special Forces soldiers further up are tougher, so we stealth kill as often as possible to avoid burning blood on celerity. We have quite a few bags left, so we didn't have have to be so stingy, but being stingy is how we got here with so many bags in the first place. The dominated guard was easy to defuse thanks to celerity, and after accidentally blowing ourselves to smithereens a couple times, we rigged his explosives to take out a group of soldiers on the next floor. Then it was time to confront the enforcer, the bodyguard the prince recently threatened to replace with us. I guess he's still sore because he's eager to tear us apart. His first phase isn't too bad. Celerity gives us time to react when he teleports behind us. I was disappointed with the pyro shotgun. I gave it leeway against the werewolf and Kuei Jin because werewolves aren't weak to fire, and who the hell knows what Kuei Jin are weak to. But it was barely better against the enforcer. The second phase took a couple tries because I forgot how it worked. We had to turn on spotlights that somehow knocked Man-Bat out of the sky. We can nearly one-cycle him thanks to celerity, but we still needed some luck. See, Man-Bat has a screech that slows us to a crawl. It is literally faster to swing our sword to move forward instead of walking in this state, and we take a ton of extra damage. Celerity comes in clutch yet again as it allows us to swat his minions away as they leap in, at least some of the time, until it wears off. We still had a close call, but we survived the debuff, knocked Man-Bat out of the sky a second time, and sliced him to ribbons. We gave the flavorless prince exactly what he deserves and ride off into the night with the Anarchs, proving that yes, you can beat Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines with only blood bags. Judging by the number of blood bags we had left, including a nearly full stack of Elder Vitae, we could have gotten by without the artifact that collected blood, so if it mortally offended you, maybe that soothes your rage. This run was tricky before we could afford blood bags, but it turns out you don't need disciplines much outside the last few boss battles, especially if you've done all the side quests, invested most of the XP in attributes and abilities instead of disciplines, and obtained an arsenal of big guns and a mythical and possibly evil sword. We ended up using melee weapons way more than I thought we would, and I'm glad we branched out because I don't know if we'd have had enough ammo to rely purely on guns for the bosses and the army of grunts we had to mow down to reach them. At the very least, I think we'd have had to rely on sneaking more, and while takedowns got less flaky with high sneaking, they were still unreliable. Celerity was the only discipline we raised past 2, and we only got its 3rd and 4th dot near the end, so discipline investment was minimal up to that point. Still, celerity came in clutch during the last bosses, and I'm curious how much harder a no disciplines run would be. Maybe we'll find out sometime soon. I also want to do an unarmed only run since unarmed was overshadowed by weapons for the most part, as well as the Nosferatu without obfuscate and Thaumaturgy absorption only runs I mentioned, so if this video does well, you'll see more Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines on the channel. On that note, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing if you haven't already. It really helps the channel. Memberships are also a thing if you want to support the channel further, get a shout out during the intro of challenge runs, and get access to new runs as soon as they're uploaded. Usually a day or two early, but up to a week early depending on when the video is ready. But regardless of all that, thank you so much for watching to the very end of the video, and I'll see you all next time.